All right. Anyway, I need to give you guys the idea of a database. So you all are entities, correct?
I like to think so.
Think of yourself that way. Okay. So, for example, Jacob, you are an entity.
I prefer to think that way. Yes.
Okay. What attributes do you have?
Matter.
I exist in this place.
Okay, so I think I have like name, made of, matter, which is apparently good. Let's see, what other attributes do you have? Like just a couple random things about yourself. I don't care what they are.
I'm blind.
I'm not doing that.
Okay, I mean, I can't see, so.
Let's do this. Class. I know you spend way too much time playing D&D.
Oh.
What's your latest class?
You must be. Oh, you asked me the true
Lower
question.
middle.
Sure.
What's the latest class you're playing in D&D, dude? This is not that hard. Wizard. There we go.
You have a spot like that.
Why am I judging you? I'm not judging you for this. That's fine. That's a fine choice of class. I mean, it's not
Wait, why am I judging you?
Let's see. So, class. Let's see. We might care about other things about you.
Whoa.
I'm going to ask you how much you weigh.
I don't actually know.
Estimation?
Or
do you not want to give it?
I mean, I don't
I'm
actually
going to guess
know.
160 pounds.
All right.
That's probably wrong. Don't feel judged either way. I just need some data. Let's see. So, somebody else want to volunteer?
I'll have fun with this.
Okay. So, story is made of
My parents' reproductive organs.
matter.
No.
Your latest D&D class is
Just put lower.
So this is PS, what happens when you collect data from users. Right? This falls into a theory that I would refer to in general as the garbage in, garbage out theory. So whatever analysis I do with this data, I'm likely to get some garbage out of it. And wait.
I found out that I'm 300 months. What? Not that skinny.
Let's see, and I'll put myself in here for kicks. And I just left that one blank. And I'm going to give or take. Okay, so these are the entities, right? The rows that I have on my list. You see that? These things are kind of the attributes, right? So my attributes are basically the name of the person, what the person's made of, their class, and their weight, right?
What was your most recent class?
I didn't have one, so I didn't put anything in there, and that's totally fine, right? So databases can't have blank entries in them, right? So that would just be like a null pointer, basically, right? You might protect against issues with managing by putting some kind of like saver character in there. Like you might put an empty list in there, or you might put a 0, or you might have a default. Yeah, exactly.
So you
guys cool with that? So like as you populate your database, as you collect your data and input it, you might have a scheme for dealing with blank spaces. It depends on you basically as the person who's collecting that data, what that scheme is. If you use a scheme where you put numbers in here, like if you have weight and somebody doesn't record their weight, probably it's a crap idea to put 0 in there, right? You'd rather if things that like weren't entered sometimes shouldn't count in the analysis, right? So sometimes it's a better idea to leave those blank than it is to put 0 in there. I knew a statistics grad student who was dealing with this like enormous database of trees. Like the entities were individual trees. Like tree number 2176 is a white bark pine. It's growing at an elevation of 9,212.5 feet. Its trunk diameter is blah, blah, blah. And they had all these measurements for all these trees, like height, density of foliage, width in one direction, width in the other direction, branch diameters at the first fork, trunk diameter 6 inches off the ground, trunk diameter 18 inches off the ground, right? Like all these measurements. And then every time a tree died, the person who was entering the data would just put zeros in for all the things.
Oh.
She had to write a script to go through all the data and collect the zeros where there should have been nothing and remove them. It took her like 2.5 days because she had to parse all the zeros out, but not the zeros that were in spots like this, right? Just the cells that only contained a zero, and also where the tree had some measurements there before, right? That's actually a really nasty problem to solve. So a little careful with the empty spaces, basically. All good with this? So entity is one of the entries in your database. Attributes are these guys. Then you need one more thing. It's not always obvious, which is how do you tell entities apart?
By name.
Yeah, in this case, you could use the names, right?
But how do you tell trees apart?
Yeah, how do you tell the trees apart? Well, you'd use some kind of number, right?
Like an array list.
Yeah, you need some kind of a, like, if you think about this as an array of objects, right? Each object needs kind of a spot in the array, right? So I need to know where to put these things. And so I need something that I can use as a key, right? Like, which thing is this is going to be your idea for a key. So I would tend to add that over here as a separate attribute. So if I was doing this, I might collect everybody kind of by their name. But if I get another Joe in my class in 3 semesters, then I can't use his name to identify. Right? I'd have to do something funky, like tack a 2 onto his name or something, which pretty often happens when you guys are getting your student email addresses, right? Because you can't have one that's been used before, right? So that's a kind of a primary key problem. That's not actually your primary key. What's your primary key for the school?
Student ID number.
Yeah, it's your student ID number. So for this primary key thing, you should really think like, that's some kind of an identification number. In some databases, like little ones, that might be your name. In others, it might be a student ID number is a good one. What other numbers do you get used?
Social Security.
Social Security often gets used, right? What else? You guys know any others? What are other unique identifying numbers?
Username. Fingerprint.
Yeah, so you might use username. Fingerprint's kind of a wonky one. Well, everybody has a fingerprint, right?
Not all of
The
them
way
have
that they're
fingerprints.
stored might be a little funny. You guys see that? So you might use that as what's called a secondary key, which is another identifying object that's not necessarily the primary key. The primary key should be something you can look up in the database. So usually it should be like a number or something. That's cool then? That said, you could probably turn fingerprint into number using some kind of algorithm, right? And then that number could be your primary key. It's cool then? So pretty often those are something that the person has. Sometimes you just generate them as you go, right? So like if I was doing this, I might just say Jacob's first, Story's second, I'm third, and I'm just artificially introducing that as people add the class. That's really kind of how your W numbers are generated anyways, right? Like you get these student ID numbers. Where do they come from? They just make up a new one every time we get a new student and give that number to that student. Kind of.
Disabled students get different, or like returning students get different.
Yeah, so there's kind of, yeah, and this goes to social security numbers too. So social security numbers are made of 3, 2, and 4, right?
Yeah.
Some of those are location and time and which creature were you, right? So some of those things are actually about a when and a where. These two guys are about when and where, and this is about which one were you. cool there? So sometimes those things have identifying chunks kind of buried in them. Like not driver's licenses, license plates in some states have location identifiers embedded in the front or the back. So that you can, like, as you're driving by somebody, you can be like, oh, hey, that person's from Missoula. Right? And that's a kind of a, you might encode some of that information into your primary key. One further thing on the primary key, you need a couple of things for the primary key. You need a primary key to be unique to each individual, right? So each individual has to have a unique primary key, and also everybody has to have one.
Can't have.
So you can't, or you don't want to use people's phone numbers as primary keys. Why?
Because they change.
Because people can share.
And
People
not
have to
everyone
have
has one.
Yeah, two reasons. People sometimes share numbers, and some people don't have phone numbers. Using social security numbers is also kind of a weird thing, depending on your group of people, right? You wouldn't want to use your social security numbers as your primary key if you had lots of, say, foreign guests, right? If you were a hotel and you had foreign guests, using social security number as your primary key would be really dumb. Why?
Because they don't
Everyone
have
has one.
Yeah, because they're issued by the U.S. government to U.S. citizens, right? Okay, so you want to spend some time with those, which is basically why everybody just generates their own. Which is why you have a million different ID numbers. Because nobody trusts anybody else, so you've got a user ID number buried in your Amazon account. You've got one buried in your grocery chain, like swipe card. You've got another one for your student ID number. You've got another one for wherever you work. You've got another one for the U.S. government. You've got like 1,000 of these things. You guys cool with that? And you have a bunch you don't even know about. Like you have a Google ID number, I'm sure. Like someplace buried in Google, there's a primary key for their user database. I have no idea where they keep that thing, and I have no idea what it is.
Their emails.
They might well be your username for your emails, with the weird exception that you can link Gmail accounts and stuff. So my guess is in the background there's another primary key there. So that brings us to my next thing, which is, like, what do I do with recording stuff for which I might have lots of chunks? What I mean by that is, like, if I had an email, right, as one of my attributes, like, yeah, I've got an email address. It's manlovej@yosemite.edu.
Thank you.
Whoa.
Sit in.
Oh my god. At yosemite.edu, like I said. And you guys have emails too, right? Like whatever at whatever dot whatever,
Yeah.
right? But how many email addresses do you guys actually have?
3 or 4.
More than one.
Like more than one, right? So you might be like, okay, so there's email, and then there's like, oh, maybe I'll just call that one primary email. And then I'll make a new attribute, right? That'll be like second email.
We must have put in 2 emails.
And then there'll be,
Third C's?
yeah, I might have a third thing for like backup email. And it sounds like some of you have at least 4, right? So I might have yet another spot for backup email. Like that's getting annoying, right? So instead of building those as attributes into each entity, I might build myself another database or another part of my database. So
Could it be a link to another small thing in each spot for like email?
Yep.
And then you get sent to this person's all list of emails?
Yeah, kind of.
So it's
So I have my one little data structure over here that has, and really this is just a table, right? So I have my one table that has my people's names and what their user number is, right? And then over here, I might build a new table, right? Oh, I wasn't doing horizontal lines before. In my new table, I might have attributes that are email and owner, right? And so here I might have manlove j at whatever, and that would be owned by me, right? So I put 3 in there. You guys see that?
And then you can have any number of emails that are all assigned 3.
Yeah, and then I might have jmanlove at Gmail, right? And that's also owned by me. It's cool, this idea? And so this is what's called a one user to how many email addresses?
2.
Yeah, I've got 2 for this one user. It sounds like I'd get 4 for some of you, right? So
Variable?
1 to more. And so we show that in database diagrams by a linkage like this. So this table is linked to this table in a one to many fashion. You guys all with me on that? So.
What if one email has multiple owners?
Oh, yeah. So what if one email has multiple owners? Well, then you might have a, instead of one to many, you might have a many to many relationship. And then you would have kind of owner 1 and owner 2, right? And you can kind of keep track of things that way. You guys cool with that? So this whole thing, like this whole idea here, that's a database. A database is just a collection of data organized in some kind of way. This is what's called a relational database that I've got up here, where this table in my database is related to this other table. You guys see that? Each table is made out of entities, and each entity has some attributes. You guys with me? Okay. One more name thing. This guy. The owner number here is related to what over there?
Primary and
Yeah, so this is related to the primary key over there.
So it's
So-
how the computer sees it.
So this is what's called a foreign key.
because it's not part of that too.
Yeah, it's not part of this table, so it's foreign, but it is a key to that table. You see that? So you use that to keep track of how this table relates to that one. If you didn't have this owner number in there, or if you just had a list of emails, then these two things wouldn't have this connection arrow. You guys see that? That connection arrow is made by this as an attribute, connecting the foreign key here and the primary key there. Cool with this?
So before the email section, when it was several attributes,
Yep.
that would be considered a 2D array, right?
Let's see. So, yeah, I could think about this thing as a high-dimensional array.
Yeah.
So this right here is a two-dimensional array by itself. Like this is, oh, sorry. So this is maybe a one-dimensional array if you think about this as the element number and the object, right? So if I add one more column to this, then it's a two-dimensional array. If I have this whole thing with like 17 attributes for every entity, then I might have a 17-dimensional array. It's messy to deal with that, so we call that thing a database instead.
Oh no, I meant because the way I know 2D arrays are, the primary key would be one array, and then each of those slots would be another array going out.
Oh, yeah, so you could make an array of arrays. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
and
would
so-
certainly work.
And so I was curious, could you just put another array in email?
Yeah, you totally could. So the reason that I'm not doing that is that making a database out of arrays is nasty. You can fake it, like totally down, and sometimes you have to. Like making arrays of arrays is a thing that gets done. It's nasty. The right tool when you start doing that is a database structure. Like basically, those are things you should be pulling out of the database, not building in the programming language itself. Does that make sense?
Sure, but then how would you make the database if not with arrays?
So a database is made in a separate language that's designed to do this.
No.
You could think about it as an array of arrays, but really it's just rows and columns. Like it's objects and attributes for each object. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Well, because before I was thinking that all of this was just as a two-dimensional array. So that's why I was curious why you couldn't just put another array inside for email.
Yeah, you certainly could. If you were hacking this in and you really wanted, like, if you were making this as an array, then certainly your email attribute of your array could itself be an array. That gets really hard to follow really fast. Yeah. It's not impossible, just hard to follow. It's cool with this? There are a lot of things that are designed to do arrays. SQL is one of the kind of primary ones. The other kind of primary one is XML. If you want to do this in processing or in Java, kind of the right way to do this would be to make objects with attributes. You see that? And then you wouldn't have to have the array of array. You could just have an array of objects, and each object could have the attributes. That would make your life a lot easier.
Oh yeah.
But you can't do that in Python, right? Because Python's objects kind of suck. Cool? I say you can't do that in Python. You could do that in Python. It would be harder.